What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Laugh to Learn podcast, your weekly spin on all the things you need to know about. My name is, of course, Jacob Paveo, and I come to you from the Great White North each and every Wednesday afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can download this podcast on all of your favorite platforms around the world or catch it over on YouTube if the video doesn't get pulled down, which seems to happen a lot, and I don't really know why, but it happens. So the best bet is to catch me, of course, on podcast platforms. If it's your first time here, thank you for checking it out. I hope you enjoy your stay. You can reach me at all of the links for my social media in the description for this podcast. Check us out at www.laughtolearnpodcast.com. There you can find our store, our merchandising, a beautiful photo of me looking all good, and lots of other stuff over there. This week, I am preparing for our elections podcast. Of course, there's only 30 days in this election cycle, so I'm thinking next week is the best time to do it because that will be about 2 weeks out from the federal election here in Canada. And but it's such a short. It's 36 days actually. It's such a short window that it's actually kind of difficult to get all of the platforms that are out there, and I want to do the exact same sort of thing that I did last time for the Canadian election and the American election, where I just go over the primary candidates. This time there are, of course, 3 primary candidates in Justin Trudeau of the Liberal Party, Jagmeet Singh of the NDP, and Aaron O'Toole of the Conservatives, and we will go over their platforms and let you know what they are talking about in trying to win your vote. And I'm under the assumption, I'm writing it already, so I know that there's a whole lot about COVID in there. So be prepared for that, but it's all the sort of stuff that everyone needs to know. One interesting thing that came out of this, though, so I started doing just basic research on it. I haven't got deep into writing the episode, but just kind of setting up the party platforms and whatnot. And I am being inundated with social media posts, not false election stuff like we saw with the American election, but people afraid of false election posts, or people kind of creating their own misinformation or misguided, let's say, information about this is about local candidates specifically, that I just thought I need to do an episode on this because it's so funny how afraid people are of things that are statistically unlikely, if ever, to come true. It's kind of like the threat of terrorism, where it's something like just over 3,000 people have died of terrorism in the U.S. since that's including 9/11. It's at like 4,000, and 3,500 died during 9/11. So if you include domestic terror attacks, it's like 4,000 people in the U.S., and that includes like school shootings and everything. Right? It's like 500 people over 20 years. So 4,000, including, September 11th, 2001. That's it. It's like the odds of you dying in some sort of terror event are so extraordinarily low, but yet it dominates people's lives. People won't fly. People don't go to public events because of these sorts of things. And I actually blame the internet. So that's what this episode is all about. It's all about social media and how the population is spreading misinformation in an attempt to stop misinformation from spreading. So you guys know exactly where you are. Let's get right into it. This is the Laugh to Learn podcast. Hey, check it out. It's the Laugh to Learn podcast. this entire idea, the whole prospect of creating this one episode of the podcast came when I was doing some research on local candidates for myself. Not so much, actually not at all for the podcast, if I'm being honest with you, but a few local candidates were being announced, and so I was just kind of clicking through their pages and looking at them. And there's one candidate in particular who is running just south of where I live, so it's one district to the south of me, and she is running for the NDP. And I read through her bio before going to social media or anything. It popped up on as a Twitter notification that the NDP had announced their candidate in the region. So I went and clicked on the page, and it took me to her bio. So I started reading through it. It was quite uninteresting, to be honest. Many people know I'm not likely to vote with the NDP, and I've made my reasons quite clear. But either way, I'm reading through it nonetheless, because you never know. You absolutely never know where things are going to go, where a campaign is going to go, where a party is going to go. Who knows? Maybe they release a platform, and I'm like, damn, I'm on board, right? You really don't know. So I'm reading through her bio, nothing about her politics. And I was fascinated to note that she had never worked a job before. So I think she's like in her late 20s, and she has 2 bachelor's degrees, and she's getting her master's in social justice, which I did not know you could get a master's in social justice. I'm not even joking when I say that I thought that was like a Twitter joke, but apparently it's not. So whatever, right? I'm reading her credentials, and I was just fascinated by the fact that she had never worked a job before. So she had like a bachelor's in criminology, a bachelor's in like something else, and then this master's in social justice, specifically in the criminal justice world, which is fine, but what I was just struck by the fact that she was selected as the best candidate, and she's never had a job, never had a career, never had a profession, right? At least AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the American politician, of course, she was a bartender for like 10 years, and similar background in that she was working on a master's I think she was doing a master's in criminal justice of some sort, but nonetheless, this woman, according to everything that I've read anywhere, has not had a job. So I guess she's like a trust fund kid, or I don't know, a student loan benefactor to the max, because I even needed jobs with my student loans. But, whatever. That's her thing. So I immediately, I couldn't vote for her anyways, because she's in a different riding, but I immediately thought much less of her, because at the age of 30, to have never held a job is kind of embarrassing. Just to be quite frank, and not saying that stay-at-home moms and stuff are one thing, but it's like she has there's no responsibilities other than she's just still in school. So she's a professional student who, for some reason, people think might make a legitimate politician and should be making real decisions after divulging theory onto paper for the last decade and a half. So beyond that, I decided to jump over to social media, and having no idea what people would be discussing, because for the most part, people don't delve into the lives of these politicians. It's usually very surface level and very political. Like, oh, she said this about, this is her opinion on that law and whatever. That's what I was expecting to find, but no, I found online that everyone was talking about her employment status. And the craziest thing of all was the number 1 retweeted and liked tweet underneath the posting by the NDP was a supporter saying that the current incumbent, so the guy who is serving right now as member of parliament for that region, it's a conservative individual, she says he was only a firefighter for 30 years. How did he help his community any more than she has? And I shit you not, that is what the tweet says. How did she help her community? Or rather, how did he help the community any more than she has? And I thought it was pretty obvious. I don't know. Putting out fires seems like a legitimate way to help the community. But Twitter never lets us down, and hundreds of people are tweeting their support, saying that a master's in social justice is, if not equivalent, superior to serving as a firefighter for 30 years. Now, I am not saying anything about the individual who is the current incumbent. I'm not saying anything about him, whether or not I would have supported him or not. I literally know nothing about him. But how can you make that argument? And then the candidate, she goes and retweets and likes that tweet saying, yeah, look, I have a master's in she's almost done her master's. She's not done yet. So she hasn't even completed her master's, and she's agreeing with the argument that she has done more for her community than a man who served as a firefighter for 30 years before going into politics for, I believe, the last 7 or 8. 30 years as a firefighter. I really don't know. I really don't know where we're headed if anything about the internet is to be made true, because no one in the real world would ever make that argument, because you would be laughed in your face, you'd be laughed out of the room if you tried saying that. I mean, like, I spent 5 years in higher education institutions, and if anyone had made a comment like that, all of us who were still in school at the time would have laughed them out of the room. Like, this master's student, not graduate, has done more for the community than a firefighter who served for 30 years. No, it doesn't. It's simply not a thing. And we can't make it a thing. It's not about to become a thing. But for some reason, Twitter supports that theory. Or at least you would assume that Twitter supports that theory by the popularity of that tweet. So that led me down this rabbit hole of what correlation is there between social media and the actual election? Because this woman's not going to win, right? She's not going to win the election, but she has far more popularity on Twitter than any of her two opponents, I guess you could say, the other two major candidates in the area. It's not even close, actually. She's far more popular online. Maybe that's why she was selected as a candidate. I don't really know. But what correlation is there? So I started looking around, and I found some stories from the 2019 election that are apropos. They correlate quite well with my assumption that what we see online, what we see on Twitter, has very little, if anything, to do with the actual election and the election results and, election fears. How do they correlate to actual findings? And specifically for Canada, because we know in the U.S., Donald Trump won an election he was supposed to lose, and then he lost an election he was supposed to win. So everything you see online is almost irrelevant. And this is from the CBC, where for the 2019 election, they actually monitored social media before and after the election. And they were working with an online monitoring group called actually I think it's just a collective of different media companies and they just called themselves Daily Social Media Monitoring, and they put out the Daily Social Media Monitoring Report. But either way, it says, in part, that the group came across posts sharing inaccurate information about the voting process, including posts citing the wrong date for the election. Now, as an aside, something like this is really bad, right? When there are posts out there, and we've all seen people's fears that from Russians to Chinese to just bad people here within our own nation putting out wrong information. Someone's going to see that the date of the election is, July 1st instead of July 3rd, and they're going to miss the vote, or I guess it would be the other way around. They'll say it's a later date, right? They'll say it's July 3rd instead of July 1st, and, someone doesn't get to vote. Well, the team also warned social media platforms about 28 instances of inaccurate information shared online and social media accounts impersonating Elections Canada. 28 instances. There are 30 million people in Canada. 28 instances of false information. That's literally, there are more instances of false information about me, a podcaster with like 100 followers, than the Canadian federal election. They found 28 instances. It's a non-issue. Like, elections, inaccurate information about the elections, at least, is a non-issue. So then you move on to worries about non-citizen voting, where, again, this is on the CBC, they write, one of the most common concerns Election Canada spotted on social media was their fear that non-citizens might cast ballots illegally. In the spring of 2019, Elections Canada reported that it removed 103,000 individuals from the federal voters registry because they were not Canadian citizens, which then sparked news stories and a heated online debate about whether voters should be compelled to show proof of citizenship at the polls. So everyone knows this is a big issue. You have to be a citizen to vote, and how do we verify it? So here in Canada, there is really no requirement. Like, there's an ID requirement, but it does, they don't actually check your photos and stuff. You just have to have your ID to get in there. And what's allowed for ID is vast. Like, there are reports of people voting with library cards and all sorts of things. Well, Elections Canada ended up saying after the election that, based on its initial assessment, Elections Canada has no evidence to suggest that the outcomes in any ridings would have been affected by instances of non-citizens voting in the 2019 federal election. They also said they were conducting a thorough review of any potential election violations, cross-referencing data it collected during the election with Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada's list of permanent residents and foreign nationals. It plans to verify that information by opening thousands of bags of elections documents in ridings across the country to filter out any data capture errors. Essentially, Elections Canada spent months after the election verifying the result and found no issues, no evidence to suggest the outcomes in any ridings would have been affected by instances of non-citizens voting. And when I was looking through it, I couldn't find any reports of fines or arrests from the 2019 election related to that. Moreover, it's important to note that in the last U.S. election, there was only one instance of an individual charged with trying to vote as a non-citizen or using someone else's ID, and that person was trying to prove that you could do it. So everything you read online shows that there's foreign election interference, right? It shows that there's tons of false information. You see people all the time, be careful where you get your information. There's tons of false information. Well, there's only 28 instances found in the last election of false information, and there are no evidence of non-citizens voting or people using the wrong identification or something like that to vote. No instances. But if you're online right now, it's insane. People are terrified. that the elections are being corrupted by other nations, which brings us to the last step here, which is foreign interference. And now, this has been brought up for two main reasons in the last election. First of all, President Obama, who at the time was no longer president, but he wrote on Twitter, "I was proud to work with Justin Trudeau as president. He's a hardworking, effective leader who takes on big issues like climate change. The world needs his progressive leadership now, and I hope our neighbors to the north support him for another term." And people called this foreign election meddling. Now, here's the problem. In Canada, we do have laws that non-Canadians are not allowed to support someone for office publicly. But that's a law that I completely disagree with. I have no problem with anyone anywhere in the world commenting on our politicians. I have problems with, for example, the brownface photo of Trudeau that was shared in a foreign news outlet. I think it was a European. It was posted on a social media account that was controlled by a European news outlet, and it was like a Polish news outlet or something like that shared the brownface image of Trudeau. That I have more concerns with, but at the same time, it's a real photo. And how can you say, like, if he wasn't running for prime minister, if he was anyone else, no one would have an issue with it? With, you know, a Polish or a Russian or a Chinese newspaper printing any Canadian citizen in black or brown face. No one would have any issue with it. But because he's running, it's suddenly an issue. You know what I mean? Like Obama supporting Trudeau. Is that surprising to anyone? Should it be illegal for him to remind us that they're both on the left side of politics? I don't know. I just don't think so. And the other issue was Greta Thunberg, who you may remember as the girl who fights the climate and never goes to school. She showed up in two protests for climate change activism across Canada in the last election, and people accused her of supporting Trudeau in doing so because the Conservative Party was against those sort of those climate change rallies. So kind of a stretch in that sense. But in the end, the Commissioner of Canada Elections did investigate and did not consider the social media channel for filing or responding to complaints according to his office. So they investigated. They determined that I am stuttering a whole lot. Elections Canada ended up explaining to some social media users that election law permits people outside the country to express opinions on topics related to Canada's election. So the law itself is not clearly defined that you cannot support a politician. The way it's worded is that you cannot state who they should vote for. Well, basically that means that you can't force someone to vote for someone else. And of course, it doesn't matter if you're Canadian or American. I cannot pay you to vote for someone in Canada. That's illegal. I cannot hold your children hostage and force you to vote for someone in Canada. That's illegal. Not only is it illegal to hold someone hostage, but it's illegal to force someone or blackmail someone into voting. So those are the big topics that I wanted to go over with this. The idea of misinformation, the idea of non-citizens voting, and then the idea of foreign interference. All of which, historically, here in Canada, and in the United States as well, might I add, but more so here, have proven to be completely irrelevant. So when I look at a story like that NDP candidate, who all of a sudden she's blowing up on Twitter, all these people are out there saying how much they love and admire her and how much she has given back to her community, more so than, you know, a former retired firefighter. It's all just noise. Twitter is a whole lot of noise when it comes to election, and it's not necessarily noise that's worth regarding or listening to. One tip that I have for a lot of people is, just in general, around elections especially, to limit any exposure to the political side of a place like Twitter. Because a lot of the, I'll use the term information loosely here, but a lot of the information you're going to get appears to be entirely portrayed for one side or another. There's no genuine conversations. Now, if you're a fan of a place like Reddit or 4chan, kind of maybe, or similar places, you can actually start to find legitimate conversation. There are some more curated areas for you to discuss things like politics. Discord, I think, is actually the best for that. If you can get yourself into a moderated channel on politics, there's a lot of legitimate discussion to be had where people aren't just being crazy. Because the problem with normal, classic social media, because if you're aware of Discord, it is social media, but it's not the classic social media where everyone's just kind of posting. You're all in moderated groups. So it's a little bit different. You can't just post something that no one's going to ban you for being crazy, right? Whereas on Twitter, being crazy is what gets you the most attention. So this individual, who I say probably truly believes that a master's degree in social justice is worth more than 30 years as a firefighter, that's fine. When their house starts burning down, I bet you they're not calling the social justice major, unless she, of course, can't get a job and becomes a firefighter. But either way, I think it's people like that, it's comments like that get the most attention. And they make it easier, or we make it easier, because of how I thought her comment was hilarious. And I bet you a lot of people that liked and retweeted thought it was hilarious. But the problem was, it then attracts the people who agree with it. And then you get the few thousand people across the world who agree with this that all suddenly look like they care about a local candidate in a Canadian election. It suddenly looks like she is this martyr. She's going to wipe the floor. But if you look at the polling numbers, it is not like that. That area is not a liberal area. This whole region around me here, like if any liberal candidate, forget about the NDP who are farther left, if any liberal candidate wins around here, I will eat my hat, because it just doesn't happen in this area, right? You're taking very conservative areas, and you have someone who may be popular on the internet, but the internet's a global thing. She has that hipster, liberal, or I shouldn't even say liberal, but leftist cachet. And she's cashing in on it in a way, but it's not going to translate to votes. It's not going to translate to political success. And for all of those reasons, I urge you, please, do not find yourself wandering into Twitter to try and make determinations about candidates, unless you're reading their tweets directly to get a feel for them as a person. That's a totally valid reason and excuse. But once you start going down the rabbit hole of subtweets, things just get a little bit out of hand and irrational, because irrationality is the number one currency on social media that grants you attention. And unfortunately, in an election, attention is the thing everyone wants. The problem is, I think in the modern day, some candidates, especially younger candidates, have conflated social media attention with community attention. Because it's your community that you're running in that matters. They're the ones who get you elected, right? If my podcast pops off in Eastern Poland, I guess we'll just keep using Poland for this episode, it's still going to be very difficult for me to become Prime Minister of Canada, right? I may do well in Eastern Poland, but I'm not going to do too well here in Canada where no one knows me. And that's just the reality of the internet. Thank you all so much for tuning in this and each and every other week. If you haven't yet done so, hit that subscribe button and get the notification when the episode goes live each and every week. Thank you for your continued support. Of course, the merch store is available, www.laughtolearnpodcast.com/store. I am looking into doing a little bit of something for the upcoming holiday season, maybe adding a few special items and maybe providing some sweet discounts. Although, I will be honest and say, everything on there I actually don't really make money off of because shipping is so expensive on it. So, of course, no shipping is included on any items on the website. The price you see is the price you pay. Shipping and taxes, everything are already included. So feel free to go and check out the store if you haven't yet done so. Either way, thank you all so much for tuning in. Take these conversations with your friends and family out in the real world. Hit me up using the social media links in the description for this episode. And until next time, keep getting those vaccines. Start getting your booster shots, because that's a thing. Keep washing your hands. Keep wearing those masks. Socially distancing. Keep on laughing. And keep on learning.